When we imagine the end of everything, our minds often conjure images of flame and fury. We see chaos erupting across landscapes, hear the deafening roar of destruction, and feel the heat of catastrophe consuming all in its path. But there exists on our planet a place that appears as though the apocalypse has already swept through, leaving behind not scorched earth but something far more profound. This place is defined not by fire, but by an overwhelming, breathtaking, and complete silence that stretches across an impossibly vast expanse. This is Antarctica, the frozen continent at the bottom of our world. To anyone who has gazed upon it, Antarctica appears as a void in the landscape of Earth. It presents itself as an enormous blank canvas of purest white, extending from one horizon to the next without interruption. This is a continent constructed entirely of ice, larger than the combined landmasses of Europe and Australia, sitting in complete isolation at the southern terminus of our planet. At first glance, it appears utterly static, devoid of life, frozen in time as though the clock stopped ticking millions of years ago. Yet this appearance of stillness is deeply deceptive. The ice that blankets this land is not a simple lid sealing away the continent beneath. Rather, it functions as a curtain, a frozen veil that obscures from view a world as intricate, as violent, and as enigmatic as anything existing on the surface above. Hidden beneath this thick layer of ice are active volcanoes that send smoke curling through the darkness. There are lakes that have existed in complete isolation from sunlight for 15 million years. Rivers flow in directions that defy normal gravity, and mountain ranges comparable in size to the Alps lie buried so completely that no human eye has ever glimpsed their peaks. Locked within the ancient rock and ice are secrets from our planet's distant past, and perhaps equally important, potential warnings about our collective future. Tonight, we will peel back this white layer, descending into the frozen tomb to discover what truly lies beneath the ice. To understand what remains hidden, we must first comprehend the barrier itself. Antarctica stands as the highest, driest, coldest, and windiest continent on our planet. It is, paradoxically, a desert made of water. The ice covering this land is not merely a thin crust that could easily be penetrated. It represents a geological force of staggering magnitude. On average, the ice sheet measures over 2 kilometers in thickness. In its deepest basins, this frozen mass plunges downward to depths approaching 5 kilometers. To put this in perspective, this depth exceeds the height of most mountains found on other continents. This immense accumulation of ice, built up over 34 million years of continuous snowfall, possesses tremendous weight. The sheer mass of this ice has literally crushed the continent beneath it. The weight of the ice sheet has pushed the bedrock of Antarctica downward into the Earth's mantle by hundreds of meters. If this ice were to vanish instantaneously today, the land would gradually spring back upward. But this recovery process would require 10,000 years to complete. Scientists call this phenomenon isostatic depression. The continent is literally bowing in submission beneath the weight of the frozen water that covers it. The ice is not merely heavy, it is extraordinarily ancient. The air trapped within the deepest layers represents a fossil atmosphere, preserved perfectly in tiny bubbles. The dust frozen within its various strata is the dust from ancient volcanic eruptions and asteroid impacts that occurred millions of years ago. Walking across the surface of the Antarctic plateau is equivalent to walking upon a frozen library containing Earth's complete history. It feels solid, immovable, and eternal under one's feet. Yet, as we are about to discover, the ice is not a solid, unchanging block. It is actually a fluid that moves, flows, and sometimes awakens with tremendous force. The illusion of Antarctica is one of permanent stillness. We imagine the ice as a fixture locked in place for all eternity. However, the ice is alive in its own way, and sometimes it wakes up. To comprehend the scale of this movement, we must examine a single colossal object known as iceberg, a 23A. This is the world's largest iceberg, a titan of frozen water weighing nearly 1 trillion tons. Its surface area is vast, covering 4,000 square kilometers, making it larger than the entire state of Rhode Island or twice the size of Greater London. For decades, this giant remained asleep. It broke away from the Filchner-Ronne ice shelf back in 1986 during the final years of the Cold War, but it did not float away into the ocean. Its keel, the massive underwater mountain of ice extending beneath the surface, slammed into the seafloor and became grounded. For over 30 years, it remained stuck in place, a stationary island of ice while the world changed dramatically around it. But in 2020, something fundamental shifted. Perhaps the surrounding water warmed slightly, or perhaps the rock beneath it finally gave way. A 23A lifted free from its prison. It began to move, drifting northward on ocean currents toward the southern Orkney Islands, a slow-motion leviathan marching toward its eventual doom in warmer waters. This trillion-ton ghost serves as a reminder that in Antarctica, the landscape itself is transient and temporary. The ground you walk upon today may transform into the ocean you sail through tomorrow. The sheer physical presence of this ice creates a reality that proves difficult for the human mind to fully grasp. We are discussing a layer of frozen water that reaches depths exceeding 4 kilometers in certain locations. This is not simply a covering or coating. It is a lid of planetary proportions, sealing the continent off from the atmosphere above, from the warming rays of the sun, and from the normal passage of time. Under this crushing weight, the fundamental laws of physics begin to change in fascinating ways. The pressure at the base of the ice sheet is so intense that it actually lowers the melting point of water. This creates a paradox that seems to defy logic. The surface of Antarctica represents one of the coldest environments in the universe, with temperatures regularly plunging below -80 degrees Celsius. Yet the bottom of the ice, where it makes contact with the bedrock far below, is wet. The immense pressure melts the ice from below, creating a hidden lubricated layer that remains liquid despite the frigid temperatures above. The entire ice sheet is not simply sitting firmly on solid rock as we might imagine. Instead, it floats on a microscopic film of pressurized water. This slippery interface allows the ice to flow like an incredibly slow river, to slide gradually off the continent and into the surrounding sea. It is a dynamic, shifting lid hiding the true geography of the land beneath, a white moving blanket that is heavy enough to physically warp the crust of the planet itself. But why does this ice exist here in such quantities? Why does it persist in this location when most of the planet remains ice-free? The answer lies not in the continent itself, but in the ocean that surrounds it on all sides. Antarctica is a fortress, but it is protected not by walls constructed of stone, but by a powerful wall of moving water. This is the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the strongest and largest ocean current found anywhere on Earth. It is a continuous churning river of cold water that circles the continent from west to east in an endless loop, never encountering land to slow its progress. This current moves an astounding 130 million cubic meters of water every single second. It functions as a thermal shield, creating a barrier that prevents the warm waters of the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans from reaching the southern continent. It locks Antarctica in a deep freeze, thermally isolating it from the rest of the planet. This isolation has persisted for the last 34 million years. It is effectively a cage constructed of cold water, and inside this ring, the climate operates according to its own unique rules, preserving the ice, maintaining the silence, and keeping the continent's secrets locked away from the warming world that exists beyond this barrier. If you could somehow strip away all the ice, if you could melt the lid of this frozen world, the landscape revealed underneath would not be a flat, scoured plain, worn smooth by the grinding glaciers. Instead, it would reveal itself as a rugged, dramatic, and towering wilderness full of spectacular geographical features. In the middle of East Antarctica, buried completely beneath the thickest portion of the ice sheet, lies a mountain range that defies all expectations. These are the Gamburtsev Mountains, and they are ghosts in the truest sense. No human eye has ever gazed upon their peaks. No wind has touched their summits for 30 million years. These mountains were discovered not by traditional explorers on foot, but by Russian scientists in the 1950s using sophisticated seismic sounding equipment, listening carefully to echoes bouncing off the rock deep below the ice. What they found proved staggering to the scientific community. This is not a small collection of hills. It is a mountain range comparable in size to the European Alps. The peaks rise upward to heights of 3,000 meters, tearing into the underbelly of the ice sheet above. There are jagged cliffs, deep U-shaped valleys carved by ancient rivers that flowed millions of years ago, and the sharp summits that appear as though they were sculpted yesterday. The mystery that puzzles geologists is how these mountains still exist in such pristine condition. Usually, glaciers act like enormous sheets of sandpaper, grinding mountains down to flat stumps over the course of millions of years. But here in this location, the ice seems to have acted as a preservative agent rather than a destructive force. It froze the mountains in time, protecting them from erosion in the same way that a fly becomes trapped and preserved in amber. They represent a fossilized landscape, a pristine mountain range standing in absolute darkness, supporting the weight of an entire continent on their ancient shoulders. But there are features beneath the ice that prove far more ominous than mountains. In the region known as Wilkes Land, hidden beneath kilometers of frozen water, satellites have detected something deeply strange. They did not see this feature with light or cameras. They felt it through subtle variations in gravity. There exists a mass cone, a massive concentration of mass buried deep in the Earth's crust. This dense anomaly pulls at satellites as they pass overhead in their orbits. This gravitational scar is enormous, hinting at a circular structure nearly 300 to 500 kilometers wide. This is the Wilkes Land anomaly, and the leading theory among scientists is that it represents an impact crater, but not just any ordinary crater. If this interpretation proves correct, it is the scar left by a meteor impact 2 or 3 times larger than the catastrophic event that killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. It sits there beneath the ice, a silent circular wound in the bedrock, completely filled and hidden by the accumulated ice of millions of years. To understand the scale of violence that created this feature, we must realize that the object which made this hole would have been an asteroid perhaps 30 to 50 kilometers across. Its impact would have rung the entire Earth like a massive bell, sending a shock wave through the planet strong enough to shatter the crust on the opposite side of the world. The dating of this potential crater leads us to a chilling possibility that keeps scientists awake at night. The rocks in this region suggest an age of roughly 250 million years. This number rings an alarm bell in the mind of every geologist familiar with Earth's history. It aligns perfectly with the date of what scientists call the Great Dying, the end Permian extinction event. This was the moment when 96% of all life on Earth vanished in the greatest mass extinction in the planet's history. For many years, scientists blamed massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia called the Siberian Traps. But the Wilkes Land crater suggests a darker, more complex scenario. Could this Antarctic impact have been the trigger? Could this massive asteroid strike have punched through the Earth's crust with such violence that it shook the mantle so severely that it caused the volcanoes on the other side of the globe to erupt catastrophically? It is entirely possible that Antarctica holds the smoking gun for the greatest murder mystery in planetary history. The evidence sits there, locked under the coldest blanket on Earth, waiting patiently for us to drill down through the ice and touch the stone that killed the old world. It is a graveyard of unimaginable proportions, hiding the weapon that created it. The discovery of hidden water beneath the ice did not happen all at once in a single dramatic revelation. It began as a ghost signal in scientific data during the height of the Cold War. In 1964, Soviet researchers dragging seismic equipment across the endless white wastes noticed something peculiar in their readings. The sound waves they fired down into the ice usually bounced back unevenly, reflecting the jagged, rough terrain of the buried bedrock below. But in one specific vast area near the pole of cold, the signal changed character completely. It came back flat, perfectly and impossibly flat. For many years, this remained merely an anomaly in the data, potentially just a glitch in the equipment. It was not until 1973, when British, American, and Danish teams flew airborne radar surveys over the same region, that the picture became clear. The radar waves penetrated deep into the ice and revealed a boundary surface that looked exactly like the reflection from a mirror. It was the unmistakable signature of liquid water. There was a liquid horizon buried beneath 4 kilometers of solid ice. The scientific world was not looking at a frozen pocket of trapped moisture. They were looking at a subterranean sea of continental proportions. This is Lake Vostok, the crown jewel of Antarctica's hidden underworld. To grasp its true scale, imagine Lake Ontario in North America, one of the Great Lakes. But instead of an open surface, place a roof of solid ice over it that measures 2.5 miles thick. Lake Vostok is huge, stretching 240 kilometers long and 50 kilometers wide. It is a body of water that has been hermetically sealed off from the rest of the planet for at least 15 million years. It is arguably the loneliest water on Earth, existing in complete isolation. The lake exists in perpetual crushing darkness, never seeing even a glimmer of light. The pressure at the surface of the water exceeds 350 atmospheres, enough force to crush a nuclear submarine like a tin can. Yet, remarkably, the water does not freeze despite the extreme cold above. It is kept in liquid state by 2 factors: the immense pressure of the ice above and the gentle warmth of the Earth's geothermal heat radiating from below. It is a thermal blanket situation on a massive scale. The ice acts as a perfect insulator, trapping the planet's internal warmth against the water, keeping it hovering just above the freezing point in a delicate eternal balance. The isolation of Lake Vostok has created a chemical environment unlike anything else found on Earth. As the glacier slowly moves across the lake over thousands of years, the bottom layers of the ice gradually melt, adding fresh water to the system. But this ancient ice contains something precious: air bubbles, fragments of ancient atmosphere trapped millions of years ago when the snow first fell. When this ice melts into the lake, that trapped air is released into the water. But because the lake is sealed under such high pressure, the gas cannot escape upward. Instead, it dissolves into the water. Over millions of years, this slow process has pumped the lake increasingly full of dissolved gas. Scientists estimate that the water of Lake Vostok is supersaturated with oxygen, perhaps containing 50 times more dissolved oxygen than a normal freshwater lake. In most contexts, oxygen represents the breath of life, essential for most organisms. But at these extreme concentrations, oxygen transforms into a toxic chemical agent. The water of Vostok is not just dark and cold and isolated. It is a hyperoxygenated chemical pressure cooker operating under conditions that would poison an ordinary fish or crab within moments. And yet, life proves remarkably tenacious. When scientists drilled down toward the lake, stopping just short of breaching it to avoid contamination of this pristine environment, they retrieved samples of what is called accretion ice, lake water that had frozen onto the bottom of the glacier. In this ice, they found something extraordinary: DNA signatures. They found the genetic fingerprints of bacteria, extremophiles that somehow thrive in the cold and dark. Some were thermophiles, organisms that prefer heat, suggesting they live clustered around hot hydrothermal vents on the lake floor, feeding on minerals rather than sunlight. But there were stranger findings that sparked intense debate. Some DNA sequences hinted at more complex life forms: multicellular organisms, fungi, and even crustaceans. Most controversially, There was even one genetic signature that looked suspiciously similar to a parasite usually found in fish. This sparked a wild, highly controversial theory that captured imaginations worldwide. Could there actually be fish swimming down there in the eternal darkness? Could there be blind white species navigating the perpetual night of Vostok, protected from the ice ages that ravaged the surface world above? We simply do not know with certainty. The lake remains unbreached, violated only in our imagination. It is a sealed biosphere, waiting patiently for a camera to one day descend and reveal its ghosts to the world above. The obsession with Lake Vostok extends far beyond simple curiosity about understanding Earth. It represents a rehearsal, a test run for the search for alien life beyond our planet. When we look outward into the solar system with our telescopes and probes, we see moons like Europa orbiting Jupiter and Enceladus orbiting Saturn. These are ice worlds remarkably similar to Antarctica. They possess thick frozen shells covering vast liquid saltwater oceans that are maintained by tidal heating from their parent planets. They look exactly like Lake Vostok, just scaled up to planetary dimensions. If life can exist in the cold, dark, high-pressure, oxygen-rich waters of Vostok, completely cut off from the sun for millions of years, then it can certainly exist on Europa or Enceladus. Vostok serves as our proxy, our test case. It is the closest thing we have to an alien ocean right here on our own planet. Every discovery made in the darkness beneath Antarctic ice brings us one step closer to answering the profound question of whether we are alone in the universe. The ice of the South functions as a telescope, allowing us to look into the possibilities of life in the cosmos. Antarctica is truly a land of contradictions, but perhaps none is more visually violent and striking than the sight of Mount Erebus. Standing on Ross Island and rising nearly 4 kilometers out of the frozen sea, this is the southernmost active volcano on our entire planet. It is a sentinel of fire existing in a kingdom of ice. Erebus has been erupting continuously for at least 1.3 million years. It is not a dormant mountain resting peacefully. It is alive and actively burning. At its summit, it holds a rare geological feature found in only a handful of places on the planet, a permanent churning lake of molten lava. The sight is genuinely surreal to behold. Against the blinding white backdrop of the glaciers and the deep blue of the polar sky, a plume of steam and sulfurous gas rises constantly from the crater. At night, during the months of total winter darkness when the sun never rises, the summit glows with a menacing red light, illuminating the underside of the steam clouds. It appears as a portal to the Earth's interior, a boiling cauldron of phonolite lava bubbling at 1,000 degrees Celsius, surrounded on all sides by ice that is frozen solid at minus 50 degrees. It is a thermal battleground where the planet's internal heat directly meets its external cold. But the true wonder of Erebus is not found at the summit. It exists on the flanks of the mountain. The heat escaping from the volcano does not simply vent into the thin polar air and disappear. It seeps through the porous rocks and encounters the surrounding ice. This interaction creates ghost-like structures called fumaroles, towers of ice that can reach heights of 10 meters, venting steam continuously into the polar atmosphere. But below these towers, the volcanic heat has carved out a secret world hidden from view. It has melted complex networks of caves directly into the glaciers. These are the ice caves of Erebus, and to enter them is to step into a landscape from fantasy. The walls are constructed of blue ice, translucent and glowing with the filtered light from the surface above. The floor is often warm volcanic rock or soft volcanic sand. The air hangs thick with steam and moisture. It is a humid, misty environment protected from the violent katabatic winds raging just a few meters of ice above. It is a hidden sanctuary carved by the breath of the volcano itself. The temperature difference inside these caves proves staggering to visitors. Outside on the exposed slopes of the mountain, the wind chill can freeze exposed human skin in mere minutes, causing severe frostbite. But inside the caves, deep in the thermal pockets warmed by volcanic heat, the temperature can reach a comfortable 25 degrees Celsius. It is t-shirt weather, a comfortable environment buried impossibly in the coldest place on Earth. If you were to stand there in the warm darkness, listening to the steady drip of melting ice and the gentle hiss of escaping steam, you would completely lose all sense of where you are on the planet. You are not in a freezer. You are in a warm sauna. This thermal stability creates a potential habitat that has existed for hundreds of thousands of years, completely isolated from the harsh environment of the rest of the continent. Life, as we have repeatedly seen throughout Earth's history, abhors a vacuum. Where there is heat and water combined, biology inevitably follows. Scientists exploring these steam caves have found traces of DNA that do not match the simple organisms found on the surface ice. They have discovered mosses, algae, and small invertebrates flourishing in the warm, damp darkness. But the DNA analysis hints at something even more tantalizing for biologists. There are genetic sequences that do not fully match any known species in existing databases. This strongly suggests that the caves of Erebus might host a unique subterranean ecosystem, plants and animals that have evolved in complete isolation, adapting to a world of volcanic steam and blue ice light. It opens the fascinating possibility that there are complex life forms living in Antarctica that have never seen the sky. Creatures of the hollow mountain existing in their own private world. Erebus is the visible giant, the obvious volcano that dominates Ross Island. But it is likely just the chimney of a much larger underground factory. In 2017, researchers analyzing detailed radar maps of West Antarctica made a startling discovery that changed our understanding of the continent. Buried 2 kilometers beneath the ice, completely hidden from view, they found the distinctive conical shapes of 91 previously unknown volcanoes. This revelation makes the West Antarctic Rift System one of the largest volcanic provinces on Earth, rivaling the famous Great Rift Valley of East Africa. Most of these volcanoes are currently asleep dormant giants, crushed under the immense weight of the ice sheet above. But they are definitely not dead or extinct. If they were to wake up and erupt, the consequences would extend far beyond Antarctica, potentially affecting the entire globe. An eruption beneath the ice would not necessarily blast dramatically into the sky like a typical volcanic eruption. Instead, it would melt the base of the glacier from below, generating vast lakes of liquid water between the rock and the ice. This liquid lubricant would effectively unstick the ice sheet, allowing it to slide much faster into the surrounding ocean. The fire hidden below acts as a potential accelerator for sea level rise worldwide, a geological wildcard that could destabilize the entire West Antarctic ice sheet from the bottom up, melting it from below rather than from above. The ice is not just melting from the warming air in the atmosphere, it is sitting on a stove that might be slowly turning on, heating from beneath. The ice of Antarctica is far more than simply frozen water. It is frozen time itself, a physical archive of Earth's climatic history. As snow falls continuously on the high plateau, it does not melt as it would in warmer climates. It accumulates in layers year upon year, century upon century, millennium upon millennium. As the weight of new snow presses down relentlessly on the older layers below, it traps tiny pockets of air between the snow crystals. When the snow eventually compacts into solid ice under this pressure, these bubbles become sealed off forever. They transform into microscopic time capsules, perfect samples of the Earth's atmosphere from the exact moment they were buried and preserved. By drilling deep into the ice sheet, sometimes penetrating more than 3 kilometers down through countless layers, scientists can retrieve long cylinders of ice that function as a vertical timeline of Earth's climate. When these precious cores are brought carefully to the surface and melted in a vacuum chamber, the ancient air trapped within pops and hisses as it is finally released after being imprisoned for thousands or millions of years. It is literally the sound of the past exhaling, the breath of ancient ages escaping into the modern atmosphere. Through this process, we can breathe the same air that filled the lungs of people during the Roman Empire. We can analyze the dust from volcanic eruptions that darkened the prehistoric sky before humanity even existed. We can measure the exact carbon dioxide levels from the last ice age with remarkable precision. The Vostok ice cores have provided scientists with a continuous climate record stretching back an astounding 800,000 years, a high-resolution logbook documenting every fever and every chill the planet has endured. It is a library where the pages are constructed of ice, written in the complex language of isotopes and mineral dust. At the snout of the Taylor Glacier in the McMurdo Dry Valleys, there exists a site that looks like a wound bleeding in the landscape of the world. Against the stark, blinding white of the surrounding ice and the gray of the exposed rock, a deep, visceral crimson liquid pours out dramatically from the glacier. It stains the ice brilliant red, flowing down into frozen Lake Bonny below. This phenomenon is called blood falls, and for decades after its discovery, explorers assumed it must be caused by red algae growing in the ice. But the truth behind blood falls proves far stranger than algae. The red color comes from rust, iron oxide bleeding from the glacier. The water pouring from the glacier originates from a subglacial lake that has been trapped beneath the ice for over 1 million years. This ancient lake is extremely salty, a concentrated brine 3 times saltier than the ocean, which prevents it from freezing even at temperatures of -10 degrees Celsius. It is also remarkably rich in iron that has been scraped from the bedrock by the slow grinding of the glacier over eons. When this iron-rich, oxygen-starved water finally reaches the surface and touches the atmosphere for the first time in an eon, it reacts instantly and dramatically. It oxidizes, it rusts. The glacier is literally bleeding iron oxide, staining everything it touches brilliant red. But the brine carries something else of great scientific interest besides dissolved iron. It carries bacteria, microbes that have lived in total darkness for over 1 million years, breathing iron and sulfur instead of oxygen, surviving in a cold, salty tomb cut off from the rest of the biosphere. Blood Falls serves as a portal to a lost ecosystem, a dramatic and colorful signal flare from the hidden life existing in the darkness beneath the ice. Antarctica also functions as the world's greatest collector of alien artifacts, though not in the science fiction sense. The continent acts as a giant catching surface for meteorites, rocks that fall from space. Meteorites fall all over the Earth at a relatively constant rate, but in a forest or an ocean, they are quickly lost, buried, or submerged. In Antarctica, they fall on a white sheet where they are impossible to miss. The ice does much more than just provide visual contrast. It actually gathers meteorites and concentrates them in specific locations. As the ice sheets flow gradually from the high interior toward the coast, they carry the fallen meteorites along with them, embedded in the ice. When the flowing ice hits a mountain range, it slows down dramatically and is ablated, worn away by the fierce, dry, katabatic winds. As the ice evaporates into the atmosphere, the old meteorites that were embedded within it are left behind on the surface, accumulating over time in what scientists call stranding fields. Scientists can walk across these blue ice fields and simply pick up rocks that have traveled enormous distances from the asteroid belt, from the surface of the Moon, and even from Mars. Some of the most significant Martian meteorites ever discovered, rocks that hinted tantalizingly at the possibility of ancient life on the red planet, were simply picked up off the Antarctic ice. It is a cosmic paradox and a geological gift. The best place on Earth to study the geology of the entire solar system is by looking down at the ice of the South Pole. It is genuinely hard to imagine, standing on the barren plateau today in the freezing cold, that this land was once loud and alive with biological activity. But if you could somehow travel back in time 100 million years to the Cretaceous period, The oppressive silence would be replaced by the roar of waterfalls and the calls of strange beasts. Antarctica was not an ice cube. It was a cornerstone of the supercontinent Gondwana, connected physically to Australia and South America as part of a vast green southern empire. The continent sat further north in latitude than it does today, but it was still positioned within the Antarctic Circle. Yet because the global climate was dramatically warmer during this period, a hothouse Earth with no ice caps at either pole, Antarctica was genuinely lush and green. It was covered in temperate rainforests similar to those found in modern New Zealand or Patagonia today. Rivers wound through valleys that are now buried under miles of solid ice. The air was thick with pollen and filled with the constant hum of insects. It was a polar paradise, a verdant green world at the bottom of the map. The evidence of this lost world is preserved remarkably well in the rock layers. On the Antarctic Peninsula and throughout the Transantarctic Mountains, paleontologists have found fossils that completely shatter our modern perception of the poles as lifeless frozen wastelands. They have found the preserved leaves of the southern beech tree and the fronds of giant ferns. But perhaps the most compelling discovery is the extensive root systems. Scientists find fossilized roots preserved in situ, exactly where they originally grew millions of years ago. This evidence tells us something profound about the past. These trees were not washed to this location by a flood from somewhere else. They actually lived and grew here in Antarctica. But living at the pole presents a unique challenge found nowhere else on Earth. Even in a warm climate, the tilt of the Earth's axis dictates that the poles experience months of total darkness during winter and months of continuous daylight during summer. These were the polar forests, and the trees had to adapt to a light cycle found nowhere else on the planet. They likely went dormant during the winter months, shedding their leaves to survive the long dark night, and then exploded into frantic, rapid growth during the 24-hour sunlight of the summer. It was a forest of shadows and light, a unique biome adapted to a rhythm that would be utterly alien to any modern tree species. The green history of Antarctica had one final feverish chapter that represents perhaps its most extreme climate. About 50 million years ago, during the Eocene epoch, the Earth experienced a sudden, intense spike in global temperature known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere soared to unprecedented levels. The entire world became a jungle, with tropical conditions extending to high latitudes. During this remarkable time, the coast of Antarctica was not just temperate and comfortable, it was genuinely subtropical in character. Drill cores taken from the seabed off the coast of Wilkes Land have revealed the preserved pollen of palm trees and the spores of plants related to modern macadamias. Imagine a landscape that resembles the modern coast of Florida or the Caribbean, but situated at the South Pole. The ocean water was warm, perhaps reaching 20 degrees Celsius, suitable for comfortable swimming. Crocodiles and turtle-like reptiles likely basked on the sunny shores. It was the planet's last great heat wave, a final luxuriant bloom of warmth before the long cooling period began that would eventually create the frozen continent we know today. It serves as a potent reminder of just how sensitive the polar regions are to changes in the chemistry of the atmosphere. The difference between a massive ice sheet and a palm tree growing in the same location is determined by just a few hundred parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. If we view Antarctica as a continental fortress, a white citadel protected by ocean currents and extreme cold, then we must also acknowledge that every fortress possesses a gate, a point of vulnerability. Every defense system has a potential point of failure. For the southern continent, that critical point lies on the remote coast of West Antarctica, where ice flows into the dark, turbulent waters of the Amundsen Sea. It is a single colossal river of ice, known to glaciologists simply as the Thwaites Glacier. But in the worried whispers of the scientific community, and in the alarming headlines appearing in media around the world, it carries a much darker, heavier name. It is called the Doomsday Glacier. This dramatic title is not born of media melodrama or scientific panic. It is a cold, hard reflection of physics and geometry. To understand the singular importance of this particular ice formation, we must first grasp its immense scale. Thwaites is not a glacier in the way most people imagine them, a picturesque river of ice winding through a mountain valley. It is a genuine monster of ice. It is a frozen expanse, roughly the size of the entire nation of Great Britain or the state of Florida. It measures over 120 kilometers wide at its face, where it meets the ocean. A chaotic, churning wall of white that towers high above the ocean's surface and extends thousands of feet below it into the dark water. It is so vast in extent that when you fly over it in an airplane, the horizon is nothing but fractured ice, extending in every direction as far as the eye can see. But the massive size is not the primary reason for the fear it generates among climate scientists. The fear comes from its critical function in the ice sheet system. Thwaites acts as what engineers call a keystone. In ancient architecture, the keystone is the central wedge-shaped block positioned at the top of an arch. It is the single piece that locks all the other stones in place, bearing and distributing the weight of the entire structure. If you remove the keystone from an arch, the structure does not just sag slightly, it collapses completely and catastrophically. Thwaites Glacier plays this exact role for the entire West Antarctic ice sheet. It is the cork firmly lodged in the bottle. Behind it, pushing relentlessly against it with the accumulated weight of billions of tons of ice, lies a vast, deep basin of continental ice that is currently resting below sea level. For thousands of years, Thwaites has been the brake on this system. Its heavy, thick tongue has pinned this continental mass firmly in place, grinding against the seafloor and holding back the inevitable flow toward the ocean. But now, after millennia of stability, the brake is failing. Satellites looking down with penetrating radar eyes have revealed a landscape of trauma and fracture. The surface of Thwaites is no longer a solid, unified sheet of ice. It is actively shattering, breaking apart. Massive cracks, some extending for many miles, are spreading across the ice shelf like a complex spiderweb pattern on a broken windshield. The glacier is accelerating, flowing faster into the sea, stretching and thinning dangerously under its own internal tension. Scientists worldwide are looking at what may be the single most vulnerable point on the entire planet, the loose thread that, if pulled with sufficient force, has the genuine potential to unravel the coastline of every continent on Earth. It is a sentinel that has stood guard faithfully for millennia, and it is beginning to buckle under the strain. From the surface, looking down from a survey plane flying overhead, the glacier looks deceptively solid. It appears massive and white and enduring, as though it could last forever. But the true attack on Thwaites is not coming from the air above. It is not coming from the wind or from the direct rays of the sun. The destruction of Thwaites Glacier is happening in the pitch-black darkness, hundreds of meters beneath the surface of the ocean, in a hidden battleground where no human eye can directly observe. It is an ambush from below, invisible but devastating. To understand this invisible war being waged beneath the waves, we must understand the unique architecture of the seafloor in this region. Most glaciers around the world sit on land that slopes gradually upward as you move inland, like a gentle ramp. If such a glacier retreats, it moves into progressively higher, shallower ground, which naturally slows the retreat and stabilizes the system. But Thwaites sits on what geologists call a retrograde slope, and this makes all the difference. The bedrock beneath it is shaped like a vast, deep bowl. As you travel further inland from the coast, the ground does not slope upward. Instead, it slopes downward, getting deeper and deeper, plunging kilometers below sea level into the very heart of the continent. This particular geometry creates a geological trap with no natural break. Driven by shifting wind patterns and our changing climate, a specific layer of ocean water has begun to invade this trap. It is called circumpolar deep water, and it possesses dangerous characteristics. It is salty and dense, and most crucially, It is warm relative to the surrounding polar water. It creeps onto the continental shelf, heavy and relentless, and flows underneath the floating ice shelf of the glacier. It invades the cavity, the dark hidden space between the bottom of the ice and the rock of the seafloor. This warm water acts like an industrial blowtorch applied to the underside of the ice. It attacks the grounding line, the absolutely critical anchor point where the ice physically grips the seafloor and holds its position. The warm water does not melt the ice gently or slowly. It scours it violently, carving out massive cathedral-like caverns in the underbelly of the glacier, creating turbulent channels that allow even more warm water to rush in and accelerate the melting. As the grounding line melts away, it is forced to retreat backward down the slope into progressively deeper water. And this is where the physics turns decisively against us, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of destruction. Because the water is deeper at the new position, the face of the ice becomes correspondingly taller. A taller ice face exposes dramatically more surface area to the attacking warm water, which causes even faster melting, which pushes the grounding line even further back into even deeper water, exposing an even taller face. It is a self-sustaining, self-accelerating feedback loop of destruction with no natural stopping point. Once the retreat begins in earnest down that reverse slope, there's essentially no friction or obstacle to stop it. The ocean is not just passively melting the glacier, it is actively detaching it from the Earth itself, unzipping the continent from the inside out in a process that may be impossible to reverse. The numbers emerging from scientific studies of this remote coast are not merely abstract data points for academic papers. They represent a countdown to potentially catastrophic change. Thwaites is currently shedding approximately 50 billion tons of ice into the ocean every single year. To visualize this almost incomprehensible amount, imagine a solid cube of ice measuring 1 kilometer wide, 1 kilometer long, and 1 kilometer high. Now, imagine 50 of these massive cubes lined up, crashing into the sea one after another, year after year after year. This single glacier is already responsible for contributing 4% of the total global sea level rise. But it is not the current speed of ice loss that most terrifies the scientists studying this system. It is the measured acceleration. The rate of ice loss from Thwaites has doubled in just the last 30 years, and it shows no signs of slowing down. We know this acceleration is real because we have sent our robotic machines where human explorers cannot safely go. In recent years, autonomous yellow submarines equipped with sophisticated sensors have been carefully lowered through boreholes drilled in the ice, descending into the pitch-black cavity beneath the glacier where no light penetrates. These remarkable robots have methodically mapped the seafloor and returned with a haunting image etched in the sediment. Carved into the mud are hundreds of parallel ridges like ribs in the sand. These are footprints of the glacier's past, marks that record previous positions of the grounding line, created by the tides rhythmically lifting and dropping the heavy ice as it retreated over time. These spectral ribs preserved in the sediment tell a story of rapid pulses of movement rather than gradual change. They reveal that at some point within the last 2 centuries, Thwaites detached from a stabilizing ridge on the seafloor and sprinted backwards at an alarming rate of over 2 kilometers per year, double the speed we observe today. This forensic evidence from the seafloor proves conclusively that the glacier is physically capable of sudden, violent bursts of retreat rather than slow, steady change. And now, looking carefully at the surface with satellite imagery, scientists see the unmistakable signs of the next catastrophic break approaching. The floating ice shelf that acts as a crucial safety belt for the glacier, holding back the ice behind it, is visibly shattering. Massive fractures are spreading like spiderweb cracks across a broken windshield, and these cracks are beginning to intersect with each other. When this floating dam finally breaks apart completely, an event likely to occur within the next decade, according to current projections, the braking mechanism will be entirely gone. the full accumulated weight of the interior ice will be suddenly free to accelerate dramatically into the waiting sea. The collapse of Thwaites would trigger what scientists call a cascade failure, a planetary-scale domino effect where the collapse of one system inevitably triggers the collapse of the next system, and then the next. The neighboring glaciers, Pine Island, Haines, Pope, Smith, and Kohler, would also rapidly destabilize as the supporting ice shelf disintegrates. We would witness the potential unraveling of the entire West Antarctic ice sheet, a mass of ice containing enough frozen water to raise global sea levels by more than 3 meters, nearly 10 feet, enough to fundamentally redraw every coastline on Earth. But the threat to Antarctica does not arise solely from warming air or rising seas. It also comes from a different kind of pressure entirely, human hunger for resources. Beneath the crushing weight of the ice, and buried deeper still within the ancient sedimentary basins of the continental shelf, lies a secret that transforms this pristine wilderness into a potential target for exploitation. Antarctica is not merely a scientific preserve dedicated to research. It is also a vault, and inside that vault lies the compressed remains of the ancient green world we discussed earlier. The lush rainforests of Gondwana, the fern swamps of the Eocene epoch, the massive algal blooms of the Cretaceous oceans, all of that abundant organic life lived its span, died, sank into sediments, and was buried beneath accumulating layers of rock and ice. Over tens of millions of years, the heat and pressure of the Earth slowly cooked that dead biological material into black gold, oil, and natural gas. Seismic surveys, often conducted quietly under the official guise of scientific research, have probed the continental shelves of the Ross Sea and the Weddell Sea with sound waves. What they discovered in the returning echoes bouncing off the bedrock was the unmistakable signature of massive sedimentary basins, the exact geological architecture that typically contains oil. The estimates of these reserves are necessarily theoretical since no drilling has occurred, but they are truly staggering in scale. Some geological reports have suggested there could be as many as 500 billion barrels of oil and unimaginable quantities of natural gas locked beneath the Southern Ocean. To put that estimate in proper perspective, it represents a reserve that would dwarf the remaining supplies of the North Sea and could potentially rival the massive oil fields of the Middle East. It is quite possibly the last great untapped energy prize remaining on Earth, lying in wait beneath the ice. And there exists a profound and tragic irony in this situation. The very substance that is actively melting the ice sheet through climate change, fossil fuel, is hiding in vast quantities directly underneath that ice. The ice is functioning as a lid on a reservoir of dangerous temptation. Humanity is currently burning the ancient dead remains of prehistoric life to warm the planet through greenhouse gas emissions. And in doing so, we are simultaneously unlocking the door to access and potentially burn even more. The treasure is there in the rock, dark and liquid, waiting patiently for the ice to retreat just enough to allow the industrial drills to penetrate and extract it. Currently, this black treasure remains locked away not by technology, which certainly exists to extract it, nor by the ice itself, which is melting. It is locked away by a piece of paper, an international agreement. The Antarctic Treaty, originally signed in 1959 at the height of the Cold War, stands as one of the most extraordinary diplomatic achievements in human history. It designated an entire continent, representing 10% of Earth's total landmass, as a demilitarized place dedicated to peace and scientific research, explicitly banning all military activity and nuclear testing. But the true lock on the resource vault came later, with the adoption of the Madrid Protocol in 1991. This protocol explicitly and strictly banned all mining and mineral extraction activities anywhere in Antarctica. It effectively turned the continent into a global park, a sanctuary that is legally immune to the resource wars and extraction industries that have ravaged and scarred much of the rest of the world. But international treaties are not eternal laws of physics that cannot be changed. They are agreements between nations, and nations change their priorities. Politics shift as resources become scarce and valuable. The Madrid Protocol contains a clause that haunts the future of the continent like a shadow. In the year 2048, just over 2 decades from now, the mining ban can officially be brought up for review and potentially modified or eliminated. This date looms ominously over the ice. It is effectively an expiration date on the silence and protection. If by 2048 the world finds itself desperately energy-starved, if the easily accessible oil reserves are depleted, and if the ice has retreated enough to make drilling technologically and economically feasible, the political pressure to break the lock and begin extraction will be immense and perhaps irresistible. Nations are already quietly positioning themselves, studying the calendar, waiting and preparing for the moment when the international consensus potentially fractures and the global park could transform into the global quarry. The ink on the treaty document is currently the only thing standing between the pristine wilderness and the industrial drilling platform. The future war for control of Antarctica has not yet started with gunfire or fleets of destroyers. Instead, it has begun with architecture and infrastructure. Across the continent, positioned on the edges of ice shelves and deep in the frozen interior, nations are actively building permanent structures. They officially call these facilities research stations, and they are indeed staffed by legitimate scientists conducting vital work on climate, biology, and geology. But in the hard-nosed language of geopolitics, these bases are also flags, national claims frozen into the ice. The location of each base is never random or arbitrary. It represents a strategic claim, a physical footprint that wordlessly communicates to other nations. We are established here, and we are not leaving. We are witnessing the early stages of a new kind of Cold War, a game of chess played with logistics, concrete, and steel rather than missiles. Great powers are methodically upgrading their runways to handle heavy military transport aircraft. They are building new fleets of nuclear-powered icebreakers capable of smashing through the thickest pack ice to ensure year-round access to the continent. They are installing dual-purpose satellite ground stations that officially track climate data for science, but could equally guide other systems if needed. China is expanding its Antarctic presence rapidly and aggressively, constructing new stations in resource-rich sectors. Russia maintains a heavy, persistent footprint in the south, just as it does in the Arctic north. The United States maintains the massive McMurdo Station, a logistical hub that functions as the primary gateway to the entire continent. Everyone is watching everyone else with quiet intensity. They are mapping the seabed with sophisticated sonar, testing the stability of the ice, and enduring the long, dark polar winters, not merely for scientific data, but for strategic dominance and future positioning. They are ensuring that when the Antarctic Treaty inevitably comes up for review in 2048, they will be the ones holding the metaphorical keys to the gate, positioned to claim resources and territory. The ice is no longer simply a natural barrier or scientific curiosity. It has become a board for geopolitical games, and the pieces are already moving into position. While the geopolitical chess game plays out on the surface, the biology of the continent is simultaneously undergoing a transformation of its own. We have always thought of Antarctica as a monochrome world, a study in white ice and blue sky. But as global temperatures continue to rise year after year, the continent is beginning to change color in visible ways. It is turning green, and this transformation is accelerating. This is not the return of the ancient forests that covered the continent millions of years ago. Not yet, at least. Instead, it is a microscopic invasion happening at the cellular level. Satellite imagery combined with ground expeditions have revealed that vast stretches of the coastal snowfields are turning a vibrant, slushy green color. This is snow algae, microscopic photosynthetic organisms. For millennia, these tiny plants have existed in the snow in very low numbers, remaining dormant and invisible to the naked eye. But as the air warms and summer meltwater increases, providing liquid water, they are blooming explosively. They are multiplying in population at unprecedented rates, turning entire snowfields into biological mats that are actually visible from space and satellite photographs. On the rocky Antarctic Peninsula, mossbanks that are some of the oldest continuously living plants on Earth are growing and spreading at rates not observed in thousands of years of their existence. This might initially sound like life triumphantly finding a way, a positive sign of biological resilience in the face of change. But in the delicate physics of ice and climate, the color green is genuinely dangerous. White snow efficiently reflects sunlight back into space, helping to keep the planet cool through what scientists call the albedo effect. But green algae absorbs sunlight instead of reflecting it, converting that light energy into heat. By darkening the surface of the snow, these algal blooms are actively lowering the continent's albedo, its reflectivity. They are helping the sun to melt the ice beneath them, accelerating the very process that allowed them to bloom in the first place. The greening of Antarctica is not a rebirth or recovery. It is a symptom of fever. It is a self-reinforcing feedback loop where life itself is inadvertently accelerating the death of the ice sheet that currently supports its existence. The continent is running a temperature, and the green flush spreading across its surface is a visible symptom of the heat rising within the system. The greening of the coast provides a visual symptom that anyone can see in photographs, but the true crisis unfolding in Antarctica is measured not in color, but in mass, in the sheer weight of ice being lost. For the last 5,000 years of human civilization, the massive ice sheets of Antarctica existed in a state of relative equilibrium, a careful balance. Snow fell from the sky, ice flowed toward the coast, and icebergs calved into the sea. But critically, the inputs roughly matched the outputs. The continent was stable, maintaining its mass. It was a sleeping giant whose chest rose and fell with a slow, steady, predictable breath. But in the last few decades, that steady breath has transformed into a desperate gasp. We are witnessing a fundamental shift in the physics of the entire continent. The rate of melting has not merely increased incrementally, it has accelerated exponentially, growing faster each year. Satellite gravity measurements, which can detect even subtle changes in mass, show clearly that Antarctica is losing ice at a rate that would have been considered completely impossible just half a century ago. In the 1990s, the loss was measurable but relatively modest. Today, it is a genuine torrent of ice pouring into the ocean. We are observing the dramatic collapse of ice shelves that have stood firm and stable since the end of the last ice age over 10,000 years ago. The speed of this change represents the most terrifying variable in the entire equation. In geology, processes are supposed to unfold slowly over vast timescales. Mountains rise over millions of years. Canyons are carved by rivers over hundreds of thousands of years. But the Antarctic ice is reacting on a human timescale, changing faster than our maps can be updated to reflect the new reality. The water is cascading off the continent in unprecedented volumes, billions upon billions of tons of it every single year, shifting from the solid state of the ice sheet to the liquid chaos of the ocean. It is no longer a slow drip of meltwater. It is a hemorrhage. The giant has awakened from its long slumber, and it is shedding its massive weight with a violence that genuinely threatens to rewrite the coastlines of the entire world. The ultimate question is not what is hidden beneath the ice, but where all that ice will go when it is no longer frozen. In our daily news reports, we discuss sea level rise in increments of centimeters or inches, abstract numbers that seem manageable, problems that feel distant and theoretical. But Antarctica deals in mathematics of a completely different scale. It operates on a planetary level. Locked within the frozen vault of the southern continent is approximately 30 million cubic kilometers of fresh water, an almost incomprehensible volume. If we were to trigger the kind of runaway greenhouse effect that melted the entire Antarctic ice sheet over time, the result would not be a gentle, manageable rise in ocean levels. It would be a catastrophic deluge. This is not merely a theoretical computer model or academic speculation. It is a straightforward physical measurement of volume and basic physics. If Antarctica melts completely, global sea levels will rise by nearly 70 meters, over 200 feet. A rise of 70 meters does not simply redraw the maps we use. It effectively erases entire nations from existence. In this scenario, the entire peninsula of Florida disappears beneath the waves, reduced to a scattered few limestone reefs. The Netherlands becomes a memory of history, completely submerged. The great river deltas that have fed human civilization for millennia, the Mekong, the Nile, the Ganges, the Mississippi, are drowned under tens of meters of salt water. Major cities including London, New York, Shanghai, Mumbai, Tokyo, and Istanbul are submerged beneath many meters of ocean, their skyscrapers transformed into artificial reefs for a new marine ecosystem. The coastlines of every continent would retreat inland by hundreds of kilometers in many places, displacing billions of people and completely erasing the fertile lowlands where human civilization first began thousands of years ago. Antarctica is holding a loaded gun pointed directly at the head of human geography and infrastructure, and the trigger mechanism is temperature. Every fraction of a degree of global warming is effectively a squeeze on that trigger, releasing water that has been safely locked away from the oceans for 30 million years. As we reach the end of our journey through the frozen South, we must recognize that the story of Antarctica is ultimately not a story of human conquest or dominance. It is a story of natural cycles operating on timescales far beyond human comprehension. The continent was once green and alive. Then it transformed into the white frozen wilderness we know today. And perhaps millions of years from now, long after our civilization has faded into geological history, it may become green once again. The political posturing, the flags planted on the seabed, the hungry calculations about extracting oil, the anxious monitoring of melting rates, all of this represents fleeting noise on the surface of a much deeper, slower reality. Human ambition moves quickly, but the ice moves according to its own ancient rhythm. In the long run, the ice always prevails, either by crushing what we build under its massive weight or by drowning our coastal cities in the rising sea when it melts. There will inevitably come a time when the machines we have placed there finally stop running, whether because we choose to leave or because the international treaties hold firm or because the environment simply becomes too hostile to sustain our presence any longer. When the generators at the South Pole Station are finally turned off for the last time, the profound silence will rush back in within mere seconds. The wind, which never truly sleeps, will begin its relentless work immediately. It will bury the research stations in massive drifts of hard-packed snow. The moving glaciers will slowly shear the runways and crush the buildings, grinding our steel and concrete into fine dust and depositing it into the Southern Ocean. The ice will reclaim every footprint we have made. The continent will return to its natural state of pristine isolation. It will return to the silence that has characterized it for 34 million years, a heavy, cold, and strangely beautiful silence that existed long before we arrived to measure and study it, and will endure long after we are gone. So as you rest here in the warmth and safety of your bed tonight, let your mind travel south on an imaginary journey. Let it drift past the cities and towns, past the forests and fields, over the dark churning waters of the Southern Ocean, traveling all the way to the bottom of the world. Imagine yourself standing alone on the high polar plateau under the endless star-filled night sky. There is no sound there except the constant wind polishing the ice to a mirror shine. There is no movement except the slow, almost imperceptible drift of the glaciers sliding toward the distant sea. It is a place of absolute stillness, representing a pause in the frantic rhythm of the planet. The secrets of the subglacial lakes, the fire of the hidden volcanoes, the ghosts of the buried mountains, all remain safe beneath the cold blanket of ice. The earth is holding its ancient memories tightly, locking them away in the frozen darkness where they cannot be disturbed. You can let go of your questions now. You can release the need to know everything, the need to explore every mystery, the need to worry about an uncertain future. The giant is sleeping peacefully, and the world continues turning slowly and steadily in the quiet darkness. The ice will keep its eternal watch over the secrets it holds. You are safe in this moment. Rest well.